Welcome back to another episode of the Zelos podcast. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder. This week, Dr. Dimitrije Caparkaba will be with me. He is the Director of Basketball Research for the Kansas Jayhawks. That's right, University of Kansas juggernaut basketball squad. He gets in there and figures out how they do what they do via research. He's also presenting at the 2023 National Conference for the National Strength Conditioning Association. The NSCA's National Conference will be in Las Vegas this year between July 12th to the 15th. So make sure you register for that so you can see some amazing presenters. Follow us on Instagram while you're at it, @Rocky_Snyder. Hit the subscribe button, and here we go. So, Dimitri, first of all, thanks for coming on to Zelos. But I'm fascinated by your role with the University of Kansas and the Jayhawks as the person responsible for research, basketball research. Just give us a sense of what does that entail for what's your job as basketball research analyst and so on?
Well, first, thank you for having me in this podcast, and I'm looking forward to discussing some research that we have conducted in our lab, and what is our mission and what are our future research endeavors, right? So, I will say my position as Director of Basketball Research in Jayhawk Athletic Performance Lab, it's kind of hybrid. The reason why I say hybrid is because I like to explain that by I'm with one foot, I'm standing in a practical world, working with athletes, collecting data, and another with other foot, I'm in academic setting, conducting research, providing innovative findings that actually can help sports scientists, strength and conditioning practitioners, advance their training methodologies or improve coaching, right? So that is kind of how I like to describe that. But I would also like to say that we, as a Jayhawk Athletic Performance Lab, we're part of the large alliance, WUSI Human Performance Alliance. It's composed of 6 institutions, which is Harvard, Stanford, Oregon, Salk Institute, San Diego, and Kansas, right? So there are different hubs within these institutions, but we are, I will say, innovation hubs. So I like to say research that we conduct in our lab, it's where the rubber meets the road. Kind of what I like to say, like, there are different types of research, and director of the lab, my former mentor, I got my PhD with Dr. Andy Fry, right, who is director of our lab. So he likes to say that, sports science research, people usually like to say, well, cancer research, diabetes. Well, yeah, that affects everyone. If we talk about sports science, that's a little smaller piece, kind of, that only affects people that are within area of sports, right? So I like to say, instead of a hierarchical approach, we should probably look at a continuum, where sports science research belongs, So I think that's kind of where we fall in with innovation research, something that actually strength and conditioning practitioners, sports scientists, or coaches can actually use to improve or modify their training methodologies.
Well, I love that, because where the rubber hits the road, that is, because typically, on average, as I understand it, it takes about 10 to 15 years for research that is based on something being performed now to actually come out. For instance, we'll take medicine ball training. And medicine ball training became popular before research really came out on it in terms of like modern research. It had to gain popularity, and then it had to get somebody that was a graduate assistant or going for their PhD to become intrigued enough to start to research it. That took years. Then they had to get approval and all that until 10 or 15 years go by. And now we're seeing all this research emerging for something we've been doing for 10 or 15 years, right? So, which is a conundrum, because we are trying to do research-based strength and conditioning, athletic training, and the like, but we're doing it with research that is outdated the moment we start. So that's awesome. What kind of things? So when your research, how long does it take? It doesn't take 10 to 15 years, right?
It doesn't take 10 to 15 years, but it actually takes time. I will say this, there are 2 things that I would like to say here. First one is that coaches, strength and conditioning practitioners, is actually where we get ideas. So, somehow there's there a typical view that sports scientists come to coaches and say, this is how you should do, this is what you need to do, this is how your muscle fibers will respond. That's why you need to do this training. And I think that that's a recipe for disaster. I think that a sports scientist should be a part of multidisciplinary team. They should, provide information and work with other team management members or team members to improve athletes' performance, right? It's rather, I say, I have as a scientist within this area, I think that my approach is how can I help, not that I'm coming to a coach and saying, this is what you should do. And I think that that's a critical difference first in a team culture, and actually how can that information be translated so that players, coaches, and all the practitioners can use, right? So I think that's a critical piece. How can I help versus this is what you need to do? I think that's in my opinion, I think that's a critical piece. And I think sports science is going to grow as years go by, but I think that's kind of a key part for sports science to be integrated into sports. Another thing that I wanted to say, this research, sports science research is a little bit faster than, cancer, diabetes research, but I will say research takes time. For example, I will publish a paper, and they will 5, 6, 7, 8 pages, and somebody says, "Oh, you guys did that last week, 2 weeks ago?" And I was like, well, wait, hold on. First of all, data had to be collected. That takes a couple of months. That's the best case scenario. I don't even want to say if you have to travel to another domestically or internationally to collect data, analyze the data, do a review of literature. It depends what research topic you're writing on. But I think that is a process that takes for sure at least a year, from the moment, if you are actually doing that as one of the top 3 papers, for example, that you're working on. But I mean, there are other obligations, and I think that a sports scientist, in this role where I am, kind of working with athletes and collecting data and publishing research, kind of, I called it, I previously mentioned it, hybrid position. But I mean, it's kind of tough to juggle, but it's interesting. I think that's a kind of passion that, okay, we can provide something new, some innovative findings, right? But I think that part of, it does take time. So, and you mentioned it. I mean, probably how we got to some questions is, okay, well, let's examine why this is done. And in our case, that idea probably came from coaches, because we have a, advisory board in our lab that's composed of well-recognized coaches such as Andrea Hudi, Coach Ramsey. I mean, here at KU, my former coach, basketball coach, Coach Mike Dean. I mean, there are other coaches. So I think that the practical aspect and coaches play a vital, important foundation in all this science structure that we're trying to do in our lab.
And how do those other universities play a role with your university? You mentioned that there's 6, I believe, Harvard and so on, that make up this collective. What's that all about?
So we're part of the alliance that I previously mentioned, BUSAI Human Performance Alliance, and each institution, its own hub. So I mentioned we're innovation hub, right? So our research is more practical, and that's where I mentioned that where the rubber meets the road. But, the ultimate goal or the moonshot of the overall alliance, that they provided funding to these 6 institutions over a span of 10 years, right? So I think we're already 2 years in that, but it's to see what is actually needed and how we can advance sports science, sports medicine, to improve athletes' performance. Again, for example, Harvard or Boston Children's Hospital, right, is focused on female athletes. I mean, that's a critical aspect. I mean, just there's not enough female athlete research, and I think that's of critical importance, right, to advance that field of literature that's out there, right? Then we have a muscle modeling, then we have other aspects, resistance exercise. I mean, other hubs are based on different aspects, but everything is under umbrella of that alliance that is focused on advancing, sports science and actually just athlete performance, and we always say, what is elite athlete? What information can we gather to help these athletes that are maybe junior basketball players, college basketball players to, make a transition and make improvement. And I think how I looked at a performance, I was Division I basketball player. I played a little bit. other levels. But I think that that's actually where I developed passion for this. I realized that everything I learned in the classroom, I applied, and I realized, wow, this works. This is how I train. This is how I eat, sleep schedule. Okay, I have to do this. And I was like, this really works. And I think that's how I developed a passion for this. And we started this discussion, that my job is my hobby, and that's kind of what it is. But I think that, how can we use science and apply it in a practical word to help these athletes advance performance? But the key, in my opinion, is that every athlete should be able to achieve their maximum. So, maybe, for example, maybe for X athlete, maximum level of performance might be Division II or Division I NCAA basketball. For some athlete, might be a professional level overseas. For some athlete, might be NBA. But again, I think that there are different aspects. But what this multidisciplinary team of scientists, coaches, and strength and conditioning practitioners, what they have to do is help these athletes reach their maximum potential. That's in my opinion. Whatever it is, just be the best version of yourself. That's kind of what I tell everybody.
So where does your role come into play when determining what it is that they need?
So, for example, a couple of recently conducted research studies that we have conducted are focused on shooting performance, and I think that you and I already talked about it briefly, but I can mention a couple of recent findings that we have done. For example, we have looked at kinetic and kinematic parameters of free throw, 2-point and 3-point shooting motions. So, for example, if you look at a free throw, right, it's probably simple shot, and free throw hasn't changed over 100 years since James Naismith, invented basketball. I mean, that shot remained the same, right? But you still have the people that are not proficient, right? So how can we help somebody, improve shooting performance? Because shooting, for example, in basketball, right now we're specifically talking about basketball, is one of the key parameters distinguishing between winning and losing game outcomes. So findings of our recently conducted study is that lower elbow positioning achieved by greater flexion in knee, hip, and ankle joints, right, successfully distinguish between proficient and non-proficient shooters, right? So we didn't stop there. We actually conducted another, and within that same study, we wanted to see, okay, well, we chose the threshold of 70%, which is kind of widely accepted as a proficient, non-proficient, free throw shooter. And besides the findings that I already mentioned, we wanted to see differences. What actually happened when a proficient shooter, the shooter that's shooting above 70%, missed a free throw shot? And interestingly, we did not find anything from variables, kinematic variables that we examined.
No lesser or greater degree of hip flexion or anything like that?
No. So that actually caused us, caused kind of, us to think even more about it and conduct another study. So for the first study, we have used, high definition video analysis. The reason why we use that is because that is something that is widely available for everybody. Everybody has a smartphone, they can record, and that's kind of practical, right? So, and that is another thing why, we have markerless motion capture system, sensor-based system in our lab. But I think that for that specific studies, how can somebody, maybe that's within the institution and doesn't have a budget and financial ability to purchase that innovative technology that's not available for everybody because it's kind of financial constraint, right? How can they analyze shooting performance? So another study, follow-up study that we have done, we use sensor-based system, XSense system, and we looked at similar variables, and we added another one, which is kind of lateral elbow deviation, so which is every single coach will say, tuck that elbow in, right? I mean, anybody, kind of knows that's one of the key variables. So I will make this long story short. We observed a similar findings in another variable that, as we hypothesized, one of the key variables distinguishing between proficient and non-proficient shooters were lateral elbow deviation, where as your elbow kind of deviated more from that, I'll say, imaginary vertical axis, the shooting percentage went down. So we did the same thing. We looked at difference between made and missed shots. And guess what? The only variable that was statistically significant was that lateral elbow deviation. So that is kind of one aspect that we have examined in our lab. So how can coaches apply this? I think that based on these findings, maybe if somebody's working with a youth group of basketball players, junior basketball players, and after reading these papers, some coaches actually can see, okay, well, let me take a look at this biomechanical parameters within this group of athletes. Okay, and if this person, I will say this is not, some people say, well, yeah, those are the findings, and that's that is the key. That's what you need to. It's like a pill. You take this pill and it fixes everything. Well, our approach is, this is only a piece of a large puzzle. From sports psychology to motor control. I mean, and that is kind of what we emphasize in our lab. What we do, it's innovative, it's kind of practical, but it's one piece of a large puzzle. And that is my approach. It's I don't like I know it all approach. I think that there's many other people, but I think when all these people work together, I think that can actually produce the biggest success for whatever the team is trying to achieve. Anyways, I'll also mention, sorry, I know I'm going too long here.
No, go.
But there's another study that we have also done besides free throw. People talk about like 2-point, 3-point shooting accuracy, like jump shooting motion, right?
Yeah.
So we did a similar video analysis, right? Similar methodology we have utilized, and I can send you these studies. They're actually published. That's why I'm talking about them. But we looked at actually, again, difference between proficient, non-proficient 2-point and 3-point shooters. And what we have found that people who had a greater elbow flexion and greater release angle, as well as higher elbow positioning during the preparatory phase of the 2-point shooting motion, were, those are the variables that kind of lean and determine those proficient shooters, 3 of the key variables from all the ones that we looked at. And just looking at these 3 variables, we could discriminate between proficient and non-proficient shooters in, I think, a 62% of cases, which is pretty high. But check this out. When we looked at a 3-point shooting percentage, we did the same thing. And the top three variables that basically distinguish between proficient and non-proficient 3-point shooters were greater elbow flexion, less trunk lean. So they were leaning a little bit forward, but too much wasn't beneficial, in greater jump height. That's what coaches say: jump when you shoot. I mean, that just actually showed to be true here. And unlike what I previously mentioned for 2-point, where the discriminating power was 62%, for 3-point shooting percentage, these 3 variables, just looking at these 3 variables, we could discriminate proficient from non-proficient shooters in almost 82% of cases, which is pretty large.
Wow.
And there was a large group of people. I think we had 25 or 26 athletes that participated in this study. So, and I think that there was just a piece of research that we're doing, and we're expanding our research horizons, with international connections, working with collegiate professional athletes on various level of basketball competition. So, sorry, that was a long answer, but
no, that's fantastic, because now I can improve my free throw by keeping my elbows in. I can improve my 2-point range by keeping my elbows up. And then I just need to jump a little bit more and either stay tall or lean just ever so slightly to improve my 3-point accuracy. I mean, that's really cool that we can do that. What about other shots? What about, and whether it's, well, I don't know, what about the hook or just any activities, any movements on the court? Are you looking at those as well? Where's research for that? You are.
I just said some of the recently published research, and I think this is evolving field of research. This is just getting larger attention because of practical aspect of it, right? But some of the shots that we are currently working on analyzing, and we started this discussion by saying how long it actually takes to publish research that's conducted in the lab. So that is actually what we just collected, I think around a month and a half ago. And we're currently working on data collection that involves skyhook. I think that Kareem's skyhook. When I played college basketball, it's almost going to be 10. I think in March it's going to be 10 years since I have been at the NCAA, championship, because we won March Madness. which is pretty crazy. Time flies by, right? But again, it is interesting to me because I always say in my college career, I score a lot of points in the sky hook, right? And I think that's unguardable shot. So it's exactly what I said, that everything from practical aspect is coming to be examined into our lab. So, that connection is very strong and it's driven by coaches. So yeah, shots that we're currently analyzing is skyhook. We're just talking to a couple of companies that have motion tracking systems that can help us analyze layup motion, different type of layup motions. I think it's very critical. We have looked at the dunking motions in the past. We have conducted brief research reports, looking at brief research, reports looking at ground reaction forces during various types of dunking motions, right? But I think it's evolving research that we're also examining. So, we're not just based on the shooting performance. I think that shooting is one aspect or one piece. Again, I'm coming to that one piece of a puzzle for optimal basketball performance, but there are other aspects. So yeah, we're one of the upcoming projects will probably look at examining the influence of fatigue on basketball shooting mechanics or influence of a presence of defender, and I say studies that we have conducted, I'm a big on a practical aspect, research being practical. And somebody asks me, well, in your studies, your participants shot 10 shots in a row. I was like, yes. But, we actually tried to examine biomechanical parameters. We didn't look at a practical aspect at that time. Exactly. So that is why, we're going to focus on examining the influence of fatigue. And I will actually say this, I think that you and I already talked about this briefly before, but the grain that our lab that I have received 2 years and a half ago, I'm pretty sure, from NSCA, and I'm a big supporter of NSCA, and I'm thankful for their longitudinal support in my educational and professional career. But I will say they funded a project focused on examining acute influence of resistance exercise on basketball shooting mechanics and accuracy. So that is kind of focused on, should I lift before practice or should I not lift before practice? And I think that the coaches and players have always thought about it. You have half of guys or girls that are saying, hey, I don't want to lift. And then another group says, yeah, I do want to lift, that improves, that doesn't improve. And I cannot talk about it yet because we're currently analyzing that data, but I think that's a little hook, maybe, for listeners of this podcast and this interview that, can kind of stay entertained in the next couple of months, because that data will be coming out soon. And it also will probably be a part of the upcoming NSCA conference. Yeah.
Which, by the way, you'll be presenting at the annual conference in Vegas this July. And what is, just without giving anything away about what you're talking about, what is the title of your presentation?
The importance of strength training for basketball performance. So I think that is something that I will kind of, my idea is to, and the goal is to split that presentation in 3 different parts. First part is to just briefly mention, okay, what is out there in scientific literature supporting, hey, this is why you have to, incorporate resistance exercise in your training regimens. And to me, it's interesting because, again, I talk to a lot of coaches domestically and internationally, and despite all that research that exists, that has been done, people still have, well, they shouldn't lift. I was like, is that right? I think that, data is data and you cannot go against data and you have a better data set, so I think that is why research is conducted. But that's going to be one piece. I'm going to talk about a couple of studies that are recently published from our lab, examining kind of that relationship of strength, power, and basketball on-court performance. And I will also talk about some of the findings from this project that we have just completed within acute influence of resistance exercise on basketball shooting mechanics and accuracy. So that will kind of be a brief overview of the presentation, but and I'm looking forward to it again and again. I'm thankful to NSCA for their support, and
well, I know we'll meet face to face during that event in Vegas this July. but it's going to look like Manute Bol and Muggsy Bogues next to each other when we shake hands, I think. Because
Yeah.
I love the sky hook too, by the way. I was considered deadly with my left hand, but I do not sit, I'm probably a couple inches shorter than Muggsy Bogues, but so swatting my jump shot was something that was common. It was like no big deal, but you get me on the hook and you were hard pressed to try and grab that. So here's one thing I'm curious about, Dimitrije, is that all the research so far has been on the offensive side of the board. It's all about the shots, the dunks, everything of that nature. But what about defense? What about looking at defensive positions? If somebody is a really great defensive player, I'm thinking of bad boy from Detroit, perhaps. He was one of the most, Dennis Rodman was one of the most amazing defensive players in the NBA in the late 80s, early 90s. Something made him that way. And obviously there was a lot of mental ability, but there was that physicality. Have you or any of the others been looking at defensive biomechanics?
As much as I'm aware, there's only a couple of research studies that have been published on defensive side of basketball game. And I think that, basketball just evolved. In my opinion, it's one of the top international sports, right? But we haven't examined defensive side of basketball performance yet. And as I say, it's a longitudinal process and it takes time. And that is definitely that we have discussed in our lab. And this is definitely one of the research topics that we plan to attack in an upcoming couple of years, for sure.
And then speaking of international, I mean, soccer and cricket, of course, are the most popular international sports going. However, basketball has exploded onto the scene. I honestly think since the Dream Team, when they first came out, I think that was what really inspired it, because now you're just seeing so many players within the NBA being drafted from abroad. How has that kind of improved research or the field of research for basketball? Are you seeing a lot of research coming in from colleagues overseas, or what's that like?
So we are developing international collaborations with coaches, sports scientists, and practitioners. They're working with athletes, and I will say I think that desire to implement sports science and obtain data within, I would say, just a training system, whatever level it is, I think it's exponentially growing, not just here in US domestically, but internationally, right? So I think that I always like to say this, 10 years ago, it was issue of collecting data, or maybe a little bit more, right? But I think that, 10 to 20 years before, within that span, I think that it was how can we collect the data? Okay, how can we collect external load? How can we collect, force plate metrics that are portable? How can we get that data, right, to examine neuromuscular performance of our athletes? So I think with these technological developments, hardware and software developments, I mean, just exponential growth over the last 10 to 15 years, I think that allowed practitioners to obtain data. So during that time, it was the issue collecting data. Well, then all this technological development allowed for, hardware, software to be made. But I think right now we're sitting on a piles of data that we don't, sometimes we don't know what to do with, right? And I think that that's a part when we choose our collaborators and we work with the companies, I think it's a piece. Can this device, hardware and software, provide something useful to practitioners, right? So I think that, collecting data just to collect data, it's pointless. It's like, in my opinion, again, maybe I'm wrong, but I think that, sitting on a pile of data that cannot be interpreted, and if that data cannot be, incorporated into regular training regimens, I think that kind of loses point and loses actually even purpose of collecting the data. So I think that right now, we're getting to like system that's widely used are these portable force plates. I mean, I think that's a big time invention, that kind of, from laboratory based force plates. And we have a couple of them in our lab. And I will tell you, they're 8 feet long times 3.5, I'm pretty sure. I mean, and that weighs 900 pounds. You're not moving that anywhere, I mean, so I think that kind of hardware that allow for, 15 pound force plate to be moved to a different place. It's a big deal, also software that can help coaches analyze the data. I mean, I know when I was doing in a biopack analysis, you actually look at a raw data curves, then you analyze. So if, for example, if you told me, hey, Dimitri, go test my athletes, I go test your athletes. And if I don't give you a report in 2 weeks, not that I'm not working on it, but in order for me to, grasp all these variables and analyze all these ground reaction force curve metrics, force time metrics, it will take me substantial amount of time. So, I think that these softwares are allowed for quick and rapid analysis. So, yes, there's still improvements that should and need to be made, but again, I think that's evolution process of anything. But I think that development allowed that I can immediately, hour after testings, or, within less than an hour, I can give you a report, and you as a coach can say, okay, well, X athlete, Y, Z athlete, okay, this is an issue, asymmetry, this, I think that those are the aspects that, can be analyzed with this innovation that's incorporated into modern world. But it's not just here, to come back to answer your question, I think it's expanding globally, and sports are just expanding globally. What I have seen is that teams in Europe, I'm originally from Serbia, but that's part of former Yugoslavia, and I mean, basketball is big there. It's everybody lives and breathes basketball. But and how many basketball players are actually coming from that region of the world, Balkan region of the world, right? So in my opinion, it's like all these teams are growing because athlete potential is there, and I think that sports science is just it's not going to stop. It's just going to expand, and it's just going to help these coaches, tailor their training regimens to help these athletes get better.
Well, that's fantastic. I'm wondering, though, you mentioned too, so much data points, so much information coming in that is, for lack of a better kind of term, background noise. How do you quiet down the noise and determine this is the information I need without getting sidetracked and lured away by so much more information coming at you? Because I can imagine you've got a certain, I'm not going to say desired outcome. You have got a certain avenue of information and desired understanding, and yet there's so much information. Yeah, how do you dial it down?
I think that it's a key part, validity and reliability. I think that it's something, if something is utilized in a practical setting, it has to be, in my opinion, valid and reliable. So I think that studies showing that this system is valid and reliable for analysis, for example, of vertical jump height, is of critical importance. If somebody might be financially, have financial constraints, some institution, and they're not able to purchase, some force plate systems, right? I mean, what if they're using accelerometer technology, so what is, error when using the technology? And I think that all these different devices, they're out there in the market. I think practitioners or people who use them, they should be aware, are they valid and reliable? I think that's a key part. And that's, what is the coefficient of variation for that specific metric that we are utilizing? I heard this, and I kind of, I just left the conversation, didn't want to get involved. But, somebody says, oh, well, I have a 30-40% coefficient of variation here, but we still looked at it. And I was like, if you have 30 to 40% coefficient of variation on that metric, and you're looking at, I mean, sure, you can collect data, but how good it is for your athletes, I don't think that it can be reliably used for training prescription, right? Or in developing training regimens around that data, so I think that is a key part. And another aspect that I will mention here, I think that the innovative technology has its benefits, and I think that, again, that's evolution process and everything is evolving, right? But technology that is non-invasive and that consumes minimal amount of time, I think that is future of sports science. I think that, collecting data without athletes knowing the data is being collected, so if we can collect data during their practice sessions without administering additional tests on the top of everything that they are doing, I think that that is kind of future of sports science. Is that markerless motion capture system? Is that load management system? Again, I'm not pinpointing on any specific technology and or devices, but I think that, in my opinion, I think that collecting data without athletes knowing that they're being tested, because I think that testing is has a bad connotation, and some athletes, well, again, so.
Sure, and that would be interesting just to see research about blind study approach to athletic performance and athletes who knowingly are under observation. Like,
Yep.
how much does that affect it? And therefore, the validity of all of this research being done with athletes aware that they are being assessed, tested, measured, and so on. Like, what's the degree or margin of error? That would be something.
I agree. One of the things I'll mention this happened, I think, a couple of months ago. We were doing testing without one of the teams, just everybody's jumping on a force plate, and it's regular day. Everything is going as planned. And in one moment, coach comes in, just passes by. Everybody, performance. And I'm looking at this, I was like, this is just crazy. I think that there's all these external factors that are coming in, that have to be incorporated into the equation. But I think that I just wanted to piggyback on what you just said. To me, that's very interesting because, it's just external factors and all other factors that can actually influence the results and testings and methodology and et cetera. Yeah.
Truly. Okay. So not to backtrack any, but just to get a little bit more of a personal insight, you grew up in Serbia. And you are at Kansas, the University of Kansas. You played basketball for Kansas. Where did your basketball career take you? Obviously, where you are now, but what was the road to getting to where you are now?
I played at James Madison University. So actually, I didn't play for Kansas. I will say these guys are pretty good. So, I played at James Madison, Division I, mid-major. I was actually a part, as I previously mentioned, championship team, Colonial Athletic Association Championship 2013. So, and it was 10 years ago. It's hard to believe that just, the time flies, but I was born and raised in Novi Sad, Serbia, northern part of Serbia. And my cousin played in NBA, right? And I think, just watching him play, I developed desire to play basketball, and I'm 6'10". So I'm 6'10" right now, 250, I'm a big guy, right? But, I was always taller than my peers, right? And I would say I was 5th grade, and I said I will never play basketball. And I don't know what happened in 7th grade, and my opinion just shifted 180. And I said, "Yep, I want to play basketball." And since then, every day, two times per day, I was working out. Basketball skill training, team training, practice. Anyways, but so I always wanted to combine education and athletics or practical aspect of training, right? Like just to be involved within sports. And the only place that could allow me to do it, because I don't know how much about like European system. Usually school is one entity and athletics is different entity. There's no high school sports, there's no college teams, that is kind of separated. Either you play or you go to school, and I say I was playing at one of the big teams in my city, one of the pro teams. I didn't have official contract, which allowed me to come to and to play NCAA basketball, right? To be eligible. But I think that that in college basketball allowed me to merge those two things, because my passion for school and education and my passion for athletics. So that's why I actually decided to come to US, and it was 2012, 10 plus 11 years ago. So I actually started my career as a Division I basketball player at James Madison University. I completed my bachelor's in exercise science kinesiology at James Madison University in 3 years. And then I completed my master's still while I was playing, and my master's was in nutrition and physical activity. So I think that those two aspects allow me to, okay, this is how I train, this is how I eat, this is what I have to, and I also have a strong passion for sports psychology, and this is how I think, So if I say I love American muscle cars, I'm a European guy, but I love, like Mustangs, Challengers, Chargers, I think that, funny thing about it is how I look at athlete, right? It's first of all, you have to have a good chassis, and that is, you're building everything with your strength and conditioning, right? Or engine, you have to have, good engine, good chassis, like good foundation, right? I mean, that has to be firm, right? So you got to build that with a strength and conditioning, right? Resistance exercise, anything that's incorporated into strength and conditioning training design. What are you putting in? Are you going to put, 87, 89, or 91? You're probably going to put 91. You got to put premium, that's kind of nutrition piece, and a big piece that I think a lot of people forget is wiring. If you turn that key on, or if you press the clutch, and something doesn't work, it's probably gonna be because the wiring wasn't correct. So I think that's my analogy maybe to sports psychology. So I think that for everything to work perfectly, you have to kind of get that together. But anyway, so after I was done with my master's, I had multiple opportunities to play professional basketball overseas. But I also had a couple of job offers in the research. So I actually worked for Brigham and Women's Hospital as a part of Harvard Medical School in Boston. And that's where I started developing passion for research. But and at that point of time, there was a different type of research. But I realized, I want to do research, but endocrinology, it's not something that I kind of see myself. I want to come back to sports, so I think that allowed me to pursue a career and obtain a PhD here at the University of Kansas, where Dr. Andy Fry was my mentor. And I got my PhD 2 years, I'm pretty sure 2 years ago, around 2 years ago, 2021. I don't know exact date, but and then I stayed in a lab as a postdoctoral researcher. And approximately almost a year, I think it's coming close to be a year, I transitioned into a position of director of basketball research, where actually, we're largely focused on basketball and kind of transitioning that. But I think all my, getting PhD in exercise physiology kind of allowed me to obtain also different insight about, human performance, and just being a part, being mentored by Andy Fry, who I have a very close relationship with as a mentor, my current boss. I mean, I think that allowed me to also learn about resistance exercise, and just, figure out what is going on in the sports science, and where should we go in the future. So anyways, that was a long answer on your question, but that's kind of where I stayed. I never thought that I would be here for this amount of years, but again, I'm glad that I'm here, and again, I do a job that is my hobby, so it's I'm thankful for that.
Certainly. And then when it comes to the professional realm, whether it's in Serbia internationally or with the NBA, do you have your sights potentially on doing basketball research in those environments?
We do have again domestic and international collaborations. We're not just based at KU, so we have conducted research on multiple sites within US, internationally. But again, I think that is that just proves that the sports science and research, again, research, our purpose is just to benefit athletic community, right? Either that being junior athletes, college athletes, pro athletes, but wherever we can, collaborate with individuals that are passionate about sports science, that are passionate about development. I think that is our goal. And again, obtain new research ideas. I think that's a big piece, because our research ideas, I'm coming back to that, are driven by coaches, driven by practical world. For example, my former coach, Mike Dean, I still have a very close connection with him, but he will say, no, that's what you should look at. That's the motion that you should analyze. And, I'll present ideas to him. And I think that's a big part of advisory board, where these well-known coaches come in. It's like, okay, well, we should probably examine we're trying to examine, I don't know, for example, free throw shooting motion. And then I think our advisory panel will say, they're experts, coaches, well, that's why you should look at it. You should probably modify this because, if somebody has 400 Division I wins, you got to listen to that coach, and I think that's where all our ideas are coming. Majority of our ideas are driven by coaches and practitioners, that everything that we do can be applied in a practical setting.
And so with your research currently, the lens is really honed in on biomechanics, as I understand, with jump shots and free throws and the 3-point line and the hook and so on. But you also mentioned these other elements that we've touched upon, sleep patterns, diet, nutrition, fueling, and then also just the natural biorhythm interruption of traveling from one time zone to another, not so much in college ranks because they typically stay for the most part in the same time zone, but with professional international leagues, that might be different. Do you find that your interest is going to turn to those other kind of elements to research, or are you doing that already? Are you doing something with sleep? Are you doing something with fueling and so on?
With sleep a little bit less. We have published research. One of the first research projects that I have conducted examined the influence of breakfast consumption on basketball shooting performance. Because to me, that question came, within the locker room a long time ago, and talking to my, teammates, it's like, I don't eat breakfast before 6 a.m. workout. And I say, I wake up at 5 to eat breakfast. What is wrong with you guys? And I think that, that conversation just went on. And one of my very close teammates, he says, you're a scientist, you go look into that. And I was like, you know what? You're probably right. Let's look at it. And we still talk about it, but we have looked at that. Some stuff that actually we have done over the last couple of months is kind of internal load, testosterone cortisol ratio throughout a game. Kind of simulated competitive game, kind of internal load. We have also done external load stuff with various systems, to examine how maybe some internal, external load, I'll say, technologies compare and stuff like that. Force play changes. I think that there's going to be a lot of stuff that will be coming out of our lab, and I'm really looking forward to it. And I'm more than happy. As soon as something is out of the door and officially published, I'm gonna send it your way. That is, we are expanding. We're not just based on the shooting performance, and there are different aspects of fatigue. We're probably going to examine some stuff in the future related to how fatigue influence some of the basketball specific skills. But again, we are expanding our research horizons within the basketball, and basketball is I'll say our main testing bed. However, we have other research aspects. My sister, she's a PhD student in a lab. She played for Cincinnati. She was on a Serbian national team. I mean, she's a big time volleyball player, 3 times NCAA participant, 1 time Sweet 16 or Elite 8. I gotta get my facts right here. But again, I'm 6'10", and I always joke around. She's my bodyguard. She's 6'3", But I mean, she's actually doing a lot of research pertaining to volleyball, right? Male and female volleyball players. We have another graduate students in our lab that are focused on analyzing different aspects, resistance exercise or change of direction performance, rowing, that's another aspect that we're focused on. But I think that if I would say 65% large amount of what we do, it's kind of focused on basketball, and that's our main testing bed. I mean, partially because of KU, but
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me you're in Kansas. They've been a juggernaut of NCAA championships for quite a long time. Dimitrije, this has been great. I've really learned a lot and enjoyed it, and it's going to improve my shot on the court, I hope, because I could use everything I got. You're going to be at the NSCA annual conference. That's July 12th to the 15th. And I look forward to sitting in on your lecture. I'm going to be completely fascinated, extending my fascination from what you've already shared here. If there is, do you get on Instagram? Do you have an Instagram handle at all?
Yeah, I mean, Instagram, dr.dimitrije, my first name, .Caparkaba. I mean, that is my Instagram handle. I'm on Instagram, LinkedIn. People can reach out to me via email too. I mean, whatever works. But I'm on social media, so Instagram or LinkedIn. I'm widely available. Yeah.
Right on. I'll put those links down below the description of the podcast for anybody that wants to connect with the doc here. So, Dimitrije, this has been fantastic. I can't thank you enough for coming on, and I look forward to shaking your hand this coming July in Vegas.
Same. Thank you for having me. This was a great discussion, and I'm looking forward to meeting you in person.
Right on.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Zelos podcast. I want to thank Dimitrije for coming on and going deep into what he's been doing with basketball research at Kansas University. And I just can't wait for March Madness to kick off because, well, every year we see them in it. And it's going to be great to know that there's those people behind the scenes heading toward the Final Four with them. Until next week, be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and we'll see you then.